Do you think you have a memory problem? That you're simply not made for studying? That some people are born with a capacity to retain information that you'll never have, and that the most you can do is accept this and work twice as hard to compensate? Wrong. Completely wrong. And I'm going to prove it to you now. Most people study in the most inefficient way possible. Not because they are lazy, not because they are dumb, but because no one ever stopped to explain how the brain really works when it's learning. And the result of this is a silent tragedy that repeats itself every night in rooms with open books, colored markers, hours stolen from sleep and rest. All of this with no results. Or with results so small that it seems even worse than not having studied, because at least then you wouldn't have the feeling of having failed after so much effort. And worse, the people who study like this, who spend hours rereading the same chapter, who copy the entire book into colored summaries, who stay up all night before the test reviewing everything, these people convince themselves that the problem is theirs, that they don't have enough discipline, that they should study earlier, sleep less, try harder. And they start building a relationship of guilt and anxiety with learning that lasts for decades. When the problem was never the effort, it was the method. Let me tell you what's really happening. You sit down to study, you pick up the book, you start reading. An hour later, you close the book. You felt like you studied. It seems like you absorbed it. But the next day, when someone asks you about what you read, something strange happens. You remember that you read about it. You remember that it was on such and such page, in such and such chapter, that the book had a blue cover, and that you had coffee on the table. But the content itself, what really matters, is gone, as if it had never entered. This is not a lack of memory. This is memory working exactly as it should, discarding what it considers irrelevant. And now comes the question that changes everything. Why does your brain consider that irrelevant? Why does it keep some things forever and discard others in hours? The answer lies in something called memory consolidation. When you learn something, that learning is not immediately permanent. It exists as a fragile, unstable, temporary memory, stored in the hippocampus in a provisional way, like a draft that hasn't been saved yet. To become permanent, it needs to go through an active process of consolidation, which is basically the brain deciding whether that information deserves or not long-term space. And the criteria the brain uses for this decision are very specific. Novelty, emotion, repetition at the right moment, connection with what you already know. Passive reading doesn't meet any of these criteria. You read, recognize the words, feel like you understood, and the brain files it as reviewed and disposable. It doesn't consolidate what seems familiar and inert. It consolidates what seems important, urgent, new, or connected to something that already has weight. Now think about the last time you had a real scare, a near accident on the road, a call with unexpected news. You probably remember every detail of that moment, the light that was on, the smell of the place, what someone said, how you were dressed. This is the brain consolidating under emotional pressure. Not because you asked, not because you were trying to memorize, but because it decided that it mattered, that it was survival information, and stored it with all possible fidelity. You can't simulate near death every time you study, but you can use the same mechanisms through other paths, and that's exactly what we're going to do. The first principle is the most counterintuitive of all, and it's the one most people completely ignore. Study in short sessions. This seems wrong at first glance. It seems like you should sit down, block the entire day, dive deep into the subject and only leave when you've mastered everything. That intuition is understandable. It seems diligent. It seems commitment. But it's completely inverted in relation to how memory really works. The brain has an attention curve that starts high, drops quickly as time passes, and rises again near the end of a session. This is known as the primacy and recency effect. You remember the beginning and the end of a learning experience better, and remember much less of the middle. It's consistent, it's predictable, and it's a structural property of the human attention system. So the logic is simple and devastating for those who spend hours studying at once. The more beginnings and ends you create, the more retention peaks you generate. A 4-hour session has one beginning, one huge and forgettable middle, and one end. A sequence of 4 one-hour sessions has 4 beginnings and 4 ends, the same total time, completely different results. But there's a condition that most people ignore when they hear this. Between each session, there needs to be a real pause. Not picking up the phone to check messages. Not putting on a series in the background while resting. Not thinking about what you just read. A genuine pause. Go out, walk, look out the window, let the mind wander without direction. This state of active rest is when the brain processes, organizes, and begins to consolidate what it has just learned. You literally learn more during the rest than during active study. Study plants the seed, rest roots it. This may sound strange. How do you learn by doing nothing? But think. How many times have you gotten stuck on a problem, gone to do something completely different, and the solution appeared out of nowhere when you were in the shower or walking? It wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't magic. It was background processing surfacing when conscious focus got out of the way. Now comes the second principle, and this one will permanently change your relationship with study because it attacks an illusion that most people carry for years without realizing it. There is a huge difference between recognizing and recalling. When you read something and think, "I understood," what happened was recognition. You saw that information, it activated patterns that already existed in your brain, it felt familiar, and you interpreted that familiarity as understanding. But familiarity is not knowledge. It's an illusion of knowledge. A very convincing illusion, because it feels exactly like real knowledge from the inside. You only know if you really learned when you try to produce the information without the support of the material. When you close the book, look at the ceiling, and try to explain what you just read as if you were explaining it to someone who had never heard of the subject from zero without being able to consult anything. This is called active recall. And it is not just a way to test if you learned. It is, in itself, one of the most powerful ways to learn. The science on this is consistent and clear. Trying to retrieve information consolidates that memory much more than any amount of rereading. Every time you retrieve a memory, you don't just access it, you reconstruct it, and in this reconstruction process, you strengthen the neural connections that store it, making it more stable and more accessible next time. It's the exact opposite of rereading. Rereading strengthens recognition, which is false. Recalling strengthens real memory. The concrete technique is simple. After reading a passage, close the book. Take a blank sheet of paper. Write down everything you remember, without consulting anything. It will seem like you know almost nothing. It will be frustrating. It will seem like you studied for nothing. But this discomfort is exactly the sign that real learning is happening. The effort of trying to remember, even when it seems like you failed, consolidates the memory in a way that rereading can never imitate. There is a powerful variant of this that can be done out loud. After studying a concept, explain it to someone, to a friend, to a family member, to a colleague who understands nothing about the subject. If there's no one, explain it to the air. Explain it as if you were teaching. And here's something interesting that happens. The points where you get stuck, where the explanation gets vague, where you realize you're using words without truly understanding what they really mean, those are exactly the points where your learning still has gaps. You just created a precise map of what you still need to study. This is infinitely more valuable than rereading the entire chapter again without knowing what you're looking for. And here comes something that very few people know, and that explains why most study techniques work much less than they could. You need to study at the right levels of information. Every subject has 2 types of content, concepts and facts, and they are learned in completely different ways. A concept is an idea that needs to be understood, integrated, connected. A fact is information that needs to be memorized directly. Confusing the two is like trying to nail a screw or screw a nail. You're using the wrong tool and you'll wonder why it's not working. Concepts you learn by asking questions, not by passive reading. Why does this work this way? What changes if I alter this variable? How does this connect to what I learned last week? Where have I seen this pattern before in another form? Concepts consolidate through genuine understanding, and understanding comes from connection. The more you connect a new idea with ideas that already exist in your brain, the stronger and more permanent it becomes. An isolated idea is fragile. An idea fitted into a network of other ideas is almost impossible to forget. There is a practical way to force this process. When you learn a new concept, ask a simple question. What does this remind me of? What everyday life situation works in a similar way? What thing I already know has the same logic? The brain learns by analogy. It builds understanding by fitting the new into what already exists. When you deliberately provide this connection, instead of letting the brain try to find it on its own, you dramatically accelerate the consolidation of the concept. And when recalling, you don't need to remember the isolated concept. You remember the analogy, and the concept comes along. Facts are different. Date, name, formula, technical definition, numerical value. These contents have no internal structure that the brain can use as an anchor for understanding. They need spaced repetition. And here is the secret that completely transforms anyone's approach to memorization. The moment you review matters more than how many times you review. There is a forgetting curve that was mapped in the 19th century and confirmed countless times since then. Right after learning something, the memory is strong, but it declines at a rate that is initially very rapid and slows down over time. Hours after learning, you've already lost a large fraction. Days later, even more. And this drop happens in a predictable way. If you review exactly when the memory is about to disappear, at the right point of weakness, it consolidates much more strongly than if you reviewed right after learning, when it's still fresh. The principle is this: reviewing too early is a waste because the brain still knows and doesn't need to exert effort. Reviewing too late is just relearning from scratch. The ideal point is to review on the verge of forgetting. At that precise moment, the effort of retrieving the weak memory produces maximum consolidation. This is what spaced repetition systems automate. And that's why studying 1 hour a day for 7 days is vastly superior to studying 7 hours in a single day before the test. In the second case, you reviewed repeatedly at the wrong moment. You didn't let partial forgetting do the work it needs to do, and you'll wake up the next day with much less than you imagine you've kept. But there's one more dimension that very few people consider, and this one may be the most surprising. The environment where you study matters in ways you don't expect. Do you have a favorite place to study? A specific desk? A specific position? A specific playlist that you play every time? If you do, you're probably creating a subtle and cumulative problem without realizing it. The brain associates memories with the context in which they were formed. This is called context-dependent memory, and it's not a metaphor. It's a real and well-documented phenomenon. The same content learned in a specific environment is more easily accessed when you're in that same environment, and less accessed when you're in another place. You do well when you practice at home, on a test, in a different environment, with different light, with different noise, with a different chair. Part of your ability to recall that information stays anchored to the original context that's no longer present. The solution is to deliberately vary your study environments. Study today at the bedroom desk, tomorrow in the kitchen, then in a library, then in a cafe. Every time you retrieve the same information in different contexts, you free that memory from a single context and make it genuinely portable, available in any situation, including the test. This seems small, but the accumulated effect over weeks and months is enormous. A student who systematically varies their study environments over a semester will perform much better on a test than someone with the same number of hours studied always in the same place. Not because they're smarter, because their memory is available in a freer way, not tied to a specific context. And there is one last principle that ties all of this together, and without which none of the others work at full capacity. Sleep is not optional. It's the central mechanism. During sleep, especially during deep sleep and REM sleep phases, The hippocampus, which is the brain structure where short-term memories are formed during the day, transmits those memories to the cerebral cortex, where they become long-term memories. This transfer process is called sleep-dependent consolidation, and it doesn't happen during study. It doesn't happen during awake rest. It happens during sleep, and only during sleep. This means that studying a lot and sleeping little is a fundamental contradiction. You spend hours building temporary memories and then deprive the brain of the only process that would make them permanent. It's like filling a bucket full of holes and considering that progress. You feel like you worked hard. You sacrificed yourself. But the next morning, much of it is gone because the consolidation mechanism didn't have time to operate. A full night of sleep after studying consolidates more memory than an extra hour of review before bed with deprivation of the rest. This is not motivational hyperbole. It's basic physiology that research confirms repeatedly. And there's something even more specific worth mentioning. Studying the most important material right before bed, instead of right before any pause, enhances this process. The brain prioritizes consolidation of what was processed last before sleep. This doesn't mean studying until the moment you close your eyes with the book in hand. It means doing a light review of the most critical content in the 30 or 40 minutes before bed, and then letting sleep do the work of fixing it. You wake up with that content more solid than it was when you went to sleep, not because it was reviewed more times, because the brain worked on it while you slept. So let's put all of this together into a single view. The brain does not retain what it considers irrelevant or inert. It retains what is new, what has emotional weight, what is repeated at the right moment, and what is connected to other things that already exist. Passive rereading does not activate any of these triggers. Reading with the intention of later recalling activates several of them at the same time. Study in short sessions with real pauses because the primacy and recency effect is real, and you want multiple retention peaks, not one single long valley of declining attention. Use active recall instead of rereading, because recognition is an illusion, and the only way to know if you learned is to try to produce the information without support. Distinguish concepts from facts and treat each with the right tool. Understanding and connection for concepts, spaced repetition at the right moment for facts. Vary the environment because context-dependent memory is a real trap that hinders you exactly when you most need free access. Review on the verge of forgetting, not before and not much after, because that's the point where the retrieval effort produces maximum consolidation. And sleep for real, and consistently, because sleep is not a reward after study. It's an inseparable part of the learning process. None of this requires more time than you already spend. It requires different time. It requires different intention. It requires understanding that efficient study is not a matter of willpower or accumulated suffering. It's a matter of working with the mechanisms your brain already has, instead of working against them. Memory is not a passive file where you deposit information and hope it stays there. It's a living process that strengthens with correct use, weakens with neglect, and thrives when you stop fighting against your own biology and start collaborating with it. You don't have a memory problem. You almost certainly have a method problem. And methods can be changed. Now, today, the next time you open a book. Learning is not a gift reserved for a few. It's a process that can be understood, adjusted, and optimized by anyone willing to stop doing what doesn't work. The difference between those who retain and those who forget is not talent. It never was. It's technique. And technique is something anyone can learn, apply, and master. Not tomorrow. Now. Starting with the next study session, which will be different from everything you've done before,